Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a book review for Persuasion by Jane Austen. So I have this book, which is Jane Austen's 7 completed novels. I got this from my husband for Christmas one year, and I am not going to put this on my shelf because it is absolutely humongous. So I will put a picture, like a generic book cover of Persuasion, up in the corner for you guys. But I just wanted to share with you this edition because it's quite pretty, but it is one of the Barnes & Noble like leather-bound classic type editions. It's got the gold sprayed edges, and it just has beautiful end pages. So just a very stunning book, and I'm super glad to have it in my collection. When I was reading this book, I did alternate between physically reading and audiobooking this. I did get the audiobook from my library. So the way that I structure my reviews is I talk about the plot of the book, the things that I liked, the things that I didn't like, and then I give the book an overall rating. If you're interested in just skipping to any one of those particular sections, I will put timestamps in the description box below. Persuasion was Jane Austen's last published novel, and I believe it was published posthumously in 1817. In this book, we are following our protagonist, Anne Elliot, and she comes from a family that has money, and the father is hoping to become a baron. So they do have a fairly high social status. She has an older sister who is unmarried, and then she has another older sister, Mary, who did end up getting married, but it was to a well-to-do family in the farming industry. So it looks like she took a step down socially, at least according to her father. But Mary is still fairly well off. And then Anne's mother died, so she has basically been raised by her father. And Anne is about 28 years old. Anne is definitely not the favorite out of the 3 sisters for her father, and she is often looked down upon, discredited. Her opinion is not taken seriously. No one really listens to her when she talks, and she just never really felt valued in her family. Her father, on the other hand, is a little bit foolish with money, and at the beginning of the book, we learn that he has gotten himself into a considerable amount of debt. And the house where she grew up, Kellynch Hall, they end up having to rent out, and the father and the older sister, Elizabeth, end up moving to Bath, and for a while, Anne stays behind to go live with her sister Mary. What we learn is that Anne actually had a love interest when she was 19 years old. His name was Wentworth, and they were just madly in love. And because Anne's mother is dead, she really didn't have a strong motherly influence, and someone that stepped in kind of to take over that role was this woman named Mrs. Russell. So when Anne was 18, Mrs. Russell actually persuaded Anne not to marry Wentworth, to break off the relationship, because she saw him as a lower social standing as Anne and her family. He didn't have any money, he was a sailor in the Navy, and Wentworth even told Anne at some point, like, give me a couple years, I'm going to rise the ranks in the Navy, I'm going to try and be the captain of my own ship, I will have money eventually. But Anne was persuaded by Mrs. Russell and broke off the engagement. Fast forward 9 years later, and Anne and now Captain Wentworth cross paths again through a group of people that they both know. They are both single and unattached, and this sets the scene for another chance at possible romance between the 2 of them. So now I'm going to be discussing the things that I liked in Persuasion. Number 1 is just how wholesome this book is. So obviously this relates to the time period in which it was written. In this book, everybody is just overly polite. Everybody focuses on being courteous and mannerly. So I just love reading about a time period where those ideals were really, really exaggerated. In addition, there's nothing graphic in this book. There's no sex. There's no even physical touching between the male and female lead. There is no cussing. There is no fighting physically. It's just a wholesome book. And yet Jane Austen, even without any type of sex scenes or physical interactions between the 2 characters, is able to create such an angst-ridden romance. About 2/3 of the way through of this book, she really, really dialed into the angst between these 2 characters, and just with their inner monologue, just with their brief conversations, just with their looking at each other, oh my gosh, there was so much angst, and she did such an amazing job. And as with any classic, I really enjoy them because it does give you a peek into history at that time. So the things that Jane Austen discusses were things that were real in her time and relative in her time. And I have been to Bath, England, so just reading about Bath as it was in 1817 compared to what I saw when I went there was just really interesting. So just classics in general really give you that peek into history. And then the next thing I like were all of the themes that Jane Austen managed to touch on in this short novel. So I think the overarching theme is definitely second chances and getting a second chance at love, as well as the susceptibility of humans to fall prey to the persuasion of others. So the whole reason that Anne broke off her engagement with Wentworth to begin with is because Mrs. Russell persuaded her, as well as her father and her sister, just saying he wasn't good enough. So I just feel like, number one, Anne fell for that because she was younger and probably, relied on those opinions instead of thinking for herself. And then we fast forward almost a decade later, and Anne has had a chance to grow and mature and kind of think on her own. And then another thing that Jane Austen, I feel like, at least in the 3 books I've now read by her, touches on is just the importance of social class and social mobility in England during that time period. It's not something that I can personally relate to because we don't have a class system, like a structured class system in the United States. But, back then women couldn't own property. They didn't have a lot of rights with regards to owning assets. So who they married basically determined their livelihood. So when Mrs. Russell was persuading Anne not to marry Mr. Wentworth, I don't think she was doing it out of malice. She was doing it to protect Anne because she wanted to see her married into, a family where she would be the most well off. And I totally get that. Another thing was how gentlemen were viewed in the society with regards to their class structure, because Anne's father was hoping to become a baron. He was a landowner. And then we have Captain Wentworth, who eventually rises in the ranks of the Navy and, gets captain of his own ship and, has a considerable amount of wealth. And now he is considered a gentleman. So I think there was just a lot of contention between what was considered a gentleman in the society, because normally it was based on land, and now we have this new class of people that are contending, based on their success and career in society. Lastly, I really love how Jane Austen was able to convey that human beings and human nature do not change over time. And the example I'm going to use is at the beginning of the book, we learn, like I said, that Anne's father ended up getting himself into debt. And it was so funny because Mrs. Russell was trying to help him get out of debt, which is something that today happens. People are in debt all over the country. And number one, but number two, she was trying to tell him, hey, sir, you don't have this money. You need to lower your extravagant lifestyle. You are overreaching. And Anne's father was like, what? No, I can't go without my ponies. I can't go without my hunting rifles. I can't go without my expensive trips. I can't go without going to these parties every weekend. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was written in 1817, and I know people like that today that, are convinced that they have to present this certain lifestyle and image in society in order to be taken seriously when they don't have the means to do so. And I just found it hilarious that this was still the case 200 plus years ago. As for the things that I didn't like, there wasn't anything about the story that I didn't like. Basically, it was just the writing style. Jane Austen uses very choppy sentences, in my opinion, and there were many times where I had to sit down and reread a sentence, as well as her word usage. I don't want to say her word usage is antiquated, but she does use words to communicate things that I personally wouldn't in my writing, and it might have been more the norm during her time. So what I guess I'm meaning to say is that this book took me a little bit longer to read than it probably would have other books, just because of the sentence structure that she used. All in all, I really enjoyed Persuasion. I thought it was so wholesome. I loved all the characters. I loved Anne. I loved the themes. It was just great being back in England in 1817, spending time with these people as they navigate society during that time. And I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. All right, you guys, let me know in the comments if you've read Persuasion and what you thought of it, and I will see you all in another video soon. Goodbye.